Can a rich nation like Canada abandon its own targets under Kyoto, then demand that developing nations adopt strict controls? To answer that, we have Chris Tindal, a Toronto area Green Party candidate. He's in our Toronto bureau. Alongside him, Lorrie Goldstein, senior associate editor of the Toronto Sun. Now, Lorrie, you penned an editorial on this subject yesterday. Tell us about it.
Absolutely. And what we said was that the Harper government is right, that for any post-Kyoto treaty to work, the two largest emitters in the world, the United States and China, have to set the example, take the lead, and be a part of the process. They may not have to have the same targets. That's a whole separate issue, but they have to be part of the process. And the irony is, we pretend this is a black hat and white hat issue. It isn't. It's very complicated. And one of those things that makes you go, the Canadian delegation is being pounded by everybody, as you said, for saying that China and the United States have to be part of the solution if it's going to work. Mr. Gore yesterday, when he accepted the Nobel Prize because of his work on greenhouse gases, said, lo and behold, China and the United States have to be part of the solution, and if they're not, they'll be judged by history.
Okay, Chris, is Canada being fairly or unfairly criticized?
Oh, it's fair criticism. I mean, Laurie's right that they have to be part of the protocol. China and countries like China and India have to be part of the solution. But that's different than saying they have to take a leadership role. I mean, for the record, China was part of the Kyoto Protocol. They just didn't have any binding targets in the first phase. But there was always an acknowledgement that they were going to need to have binding targets eventually. What they don't need, as Lorrie just said, is to take a leadership position. It's a solution that's designed for failure. And what they certainly don't need is to be forced or asked by Canada, who hasn't even tried to meet our targets so far, to reduce their emissions by the same degree that we're being asked to reduce our emissions. That's a recipe for failure. And when you go into negotiation knowing that your plan is not going to work, there's only one word for that, and it's sabotage.
But Lorrie is not suggesting that. He is suggesting, if I may, that you should have different targets.
So is Mr. Baird. Mr. Baird said that yesterday, that he's not talking about equal targets for everyone. He's in fact talking about different targets. And really, in the real world, once you get by the rhetoric, and the problem with Canada's position is that we have no credibility. We have no credibility because we signed the Kyoto Treaty in 1997, and then the previous Liberal government for 8 years, and the current Conservative government for 2, have done nothing. That's absolutely true, and it's time to do something. Apparently, Mr. Harper can't say anything without being accused of being a saboteur and a turncoat. But again, it's not black hats and white hats. In 1997, Mr. Gore, when he was the Vice President of the United States, said that the United States would not submit the Kyoto Treaty to the Congress to ratify it until developing nations were part of the protocol. Now, this is a complex issue, and we have to be fair, and we have to be, it's not going to be, we're going to beat up little Canada into doing more as 2% of the global emissions, which we should do, and the problem's going to be solved. That's not what's going on here.
Well, I'll agree with Lorrie that it's a complex issue. Obviously, that's true. But what isn't true is that our government is negotiating different targets for different countries. We have leaked negotiation notes that say that they were going in, that the Canadian negotiators were told specifically to negotiate the same reduction targets as Canada. Now, China currently has per capita emissions of around 4 tons, and Canada has per capita emissions around 19 tons. So if you want to say to China and Canada, guess what? You have to reduce your emissions by the same percentage, even when we're that far ahead. And remember, India is even further behind. India still has some of the lowest emissions per capita in the world. So to say an overall percentage reduction for those countries has to be the same as Canada is a recipe for failure.
Again, nobody's saying that. You see, this is what I find so frustrating. That China, the United States, and India, mainly China, are scheduled to build over 800 coal plants in the immediate future. If that doesn't stop, no matter what happens, it's going to be a disaster. And on the issue of using per capita, as opposed to, when Canada and the United States said, well, let's do it based on intensity, carbon intensity. The environmental movement said, you can't fool the planet. 1 ton of carbon dioxide is 1 ton of carbon dioxide. That's true. Now they say, well, because China does it less per person, you can't fool the planet. 1 ton of carbon dioxide is 1 ton of carbon dioxide. The United States, China, and India account for more than half of global emissions. On some charts, China has already overtaken the United States as the leading emitter. It's certainly expected to do it in the next few years. The developing world in the next 10 to 20 years will take over from the developing world, not because they're bad people. It's because they are going through the Industrial Revolution that we went through a century ago. And that Industrial Revolution, yes, we used coal and oil and natural gas. And you know what? It gave us the highest standards of living in the world. It gave us, so this isn't the thing of here are the good people, here are the bad people. This is a complicated issue. Everybody's got to pull together. We got to stop the rhetoric, and we got to get to work.
Chris, how do you see this turning out? Did Canada maybe, are targets unrealistic?
I would love to be proven wrong, and obviously the proof will be in what comes out of Bali. My contention is that the Canadian government has no intention of successfully negotiating any sort of meaningful framework to further the negotiations beyond this. I do believe that they are trying to act as a saboteur in order to create a wedge issue in the next election and split the vote of all the pro-Kyoto and pro-climate change action parties along them so that they can get a false majority or another false minority getting more seats than the actual percentage of votes that they receive. But hopefully I'll be proven wrong. We'll see when we come out of this. But what we actually have to see are real reductions from all countries on the levels that the science is telling us is necessary.
Yeah, I agree.
We don't even know if this government is yet to receive a scientific briefing on climate change, let alone whether they're aiming for those levels.
I would just say that be wary of anyone who says this all hangs on Canada. The Bali meeting is not set up to develop a post-Kyoto treaty. It's set up to start a discussion process.
Got it.
The real discussions come a couple years from now.
Okay, thanks so much to Chris Tindal and Lorrie Goldstein. And Lorrie, we'll get you a new earpiece next time we do an interview.
Or maybe a new head.
Well, that's up to you. Thanks so much, gentlemen. Appreciate
Take care.
it.
Thank you.